In one of my most recent videos, when I was proposing potential solutions for the game's slow development, I mentioned the possibility of working with a company. During this part of the video, I portrayed companies as evil, greedy entities that would steal money from me, take full possession of Yandere Simulator, and censor the game. It was a bad idea to portray companies like this, because not every game developer or game publisher is like that. The language that I used to describe companies in my previous video probably had a strong effect on the poll where I asked people what they wanted me to do. Let me take a moment to talk about companies in a non-biased way. Not every company is an evil, greedy monster that is going to treat its partners unfairly. Some companies have a lot of bad stories associated with them, but other companies have a good reputation for being fair to their partners and never screwing anyone over. Some companies don't want to do any more work than necessary, but other companies are known for providing lots of support to their partners and for genuinely helping out in every way they can. Over the past 2 weeks, I've spent a lot of time speaking with a company that has experience developing games, publishing games, and also working together with struggling developers to help them finish their games. This company has a very good reputation among indie devs, and their name came up numerous times when I asked other developers to recommend a good company to work with. When I asked people for their opinion on this company, nobody was able to tell me a single negative thing about them. This company is named tinyBuild. You may recognize them as the publisher of Hello Neighbor and numerous other games. After I uploaded a video expressing the difficulties I was having with Yandere Simulator's development, tinyBuild reached out to me and offered to help. Some of the people who work for tinyBuild are fans of the game and would love to work on it. Even the CEO's wife is a fan of the game. To be honest, I've had my eye on this company for a while, and I was secretly hoping that tinyBuild senpai would notice me one day. They proposed the idea of putting together a team of people to develop the game for me, while I remain the game's lead designer and creative director. Throughout the second half of February, we spent hours talking over the phone and exchanged a lot of emails, ironing out as many details as possible. Eventually, we reached an agreement that I was happy with, and I decided to enter a partnership with them. Don't be worried. I'll retain full ownership of the Yandere Simulator intellectual property. I'll have full creative control over the game. I'll have the final say on all merchandising decisions. They can't exploit the product in any way that goes against my wishes, and no deadlines have been set in stone. The game can't have any content that would get it an adults-only rating, but that was already my intention from the beginning. I have no experience hiring people, drafting contracts, trademarking things, or any of the other business-related or law-related aspects of game development. I'm good at making prototypes and implementing low-hanging fruit very quickly, but I'm not really experienced enough to write complex character AI or do some of the other complicated things that are needed to make Yandere Simulator become a reality. So it makes perfect sense for me to partner up with a company like tinyBuild and let them handle all of the things that I'm bad at while I focus only on the things that I'm good at. From the perspective of important members of the game industry like Steam and Twitch, I'm just some random dude who hasn't even finished his first video game yet. But tinyBuild has already built good relationships with companies like Steam and Twitch. It should be easier for me to work together with these platforms, with tinyBuild as my partner. Now, partnering with tinyBuild doesn't mean that I've suddenly got millions of dollars to throw around. And it doesn't mean that all of the volunteers that I've been working with this entire time are immediately going to be replaced. Let me spell out the plan. tinyBuild is going to assemble a team of professionals for me, improve the game's code for me, and generally speed up the game's development. They've agreed to invest a specific amount of money just to set things in motion, but they can't single-handedly finance the entire game. We still need to raise money for the game's development. This was already part of the plan even before tinyBuild got involved, so this doesn't change anything in that regard. The original plan was to raise a budget by holding a crowdfunding campaign. Another idea is to imitate the same business model that is used by Hello Neighbor, funding the game's development by charging money for access to the game's alpha version. In other words, we would fund Yandere Simulator's development by charging money for access to its alpha version. tinyBuild tells me that this has proven to be a very successful way to finance a game's development. Yandere Simulator's alpha would cost about half as much as Hello Neighbor's alpha, and buying the alpha version would give you full access to the full version once the game is complete. The scope of Yandere Simulator will be determined by the size of its budget. The more money we raise, the more time, work, and features we can put into the game. Maybe we'll even show you the number of copies sold on the game's website, with a progress bar showing you how much more money we would need to hit our next development goal. The game's next big feature is Osana. If we choose to launch a crowdfunding campaign, I would work on Osana until she's ready, release a free demo, and then launch the crowdfunding campaign. The money that we raise would be the game's budget. Once we've added at least 2 rivals to the game would have too much content to justify giving it away for free, so you'd have to pay for access to the game from that point onward, just like Hello Neighbor or any other early access game that is still in development. If we don't choose to launch a crowdfunding campaign, and we charge money for access to the alpha version of the game instead, you would need to pay money to have the build of the game that finally has Osana in it. In this case, I would want to polish Yandere Simulator as much as humanly possible until it's an experience that I think is worth charging money for. If I release Osana for free, she wouldn't be as polished. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, since the lack of polish would demonstrate the fact that the game seriously needs an actual budget. Osana needs to be finished before we can decide on either course of action, so we still have some time to make a decision. While I'm working on Osana using the game's current code, a much more experienced programmer hired by tinyBuild will be working on building a better codebase. Maybe the new codebase will be ready before Osana is finished. Or maybe I'll finish Osana long before then. It's too early to know for sure. So what does this mean for the volunteers who have been helping me up until this point? As of right now, it doesn't change anything. Like I said, partnering with a company doesn't mean that I suddenly have millions of dollars. I'll need to continue relying on the help of volunteers until we have a real budget, either as the result of a crowdfunding campaign or from selling the alpha version of the game. Many of the volunteers that I've been working with are awesome at what they do, and I definitely want them to continue being a part of the project once we have a real budget. Some of the current volunteers may become paid contractors once we have a budget. So, what does this mean for my Patreon? Well, I'm not asking tinyBuild to pay me. Any money that they are willing to invest in the project should go towards the game's development, not into my pocket. This means that YouTube ad revenue and Patreon donations are still my only sources of income. The original purpose of my Patreon was to provide me with money so that I could stop working as a freelance programmer and focus my attention full-time on Yandere Simulator. Now that I've teamed up with a company, I no longer have the option of downgrading Yandere Sim to a hobby. In other words, I will now be doing the same amount of work regardless of how much money I'm making on Patreon. It would kinda suck to work for free, so it would be nice to continue having your support. Now, don't get the wrong idea. tinyBuild doesn't have a magic wand that will instantly make the game's development go faster. You won't see any huge, drastic changes occurring immediately. We will start with small things, and as we grow comfortable working with one another, tinyBuild will slowly take a larger and larger role in the game's development until I'm only responsible for creative direction. So, in summary, a game company called tinyBuild is going to be helping me out in numerous ways. Yandere Simulator's codebase is going to be improved and optimized by a programmer who can do a much better job than me. One possible alternative to Kickstarter is to imitate Hello Neighbor's business model. We won't take steps to raise a budget until after Osana is implemented, so my top priority is still to get Osana in the game. I still want to work together with all of the current volunteers and potentially include some of them in the final development team once we have a budget. That's everything that I have to say for now. I hope you'll be rooting for tinyBuild as we work together on the game. As always, thank you for following the development of Yandere Simulator.